Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, January 29th, 2025, and today on the Roundup, we're answering three questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. Obviously, it's been a very chaotic week for a lot of us on campus as we come to grips with Trump 2.0 and what that new old administration is going to have in store for us when it comes to international education topics. We're going to delve into some of them today in our first topic of the day, but wanted to first share, as we do each week, that the questions that we ask and answer here on Wednesday come from our newsletter, the stories that we put out in our newsletter that comes out on Monday morning. And for those that aren't familiar, that newsletter is called All the SMIE News Fit to Share, and that's available on our website through email subscription, and I'll drop the link to our website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe. That link is going into the chat now, but you'll also get a copy of this week's edition of the email version in your inbox, or that'll come in your inbox 9 o'clock Monday morning every week. And that version I'm dropping in the chat as well. The second way you can get the newsletter, and this is where the majority of folks who do receive our newsletter content each week, is via LinkedIn, and that link is in the chat for you as well. So that LinkedIn version and the email version, between the two of them, we now have well over 2,400 subscribers that are getting their international ed news every week in their inbox or in their email or in their LinkedIn notifications Monday morning every week. So we're so humbled and so excited that so many international educators here in the U.S. and abroad are taking advantage of the Midweek Roundup as part of their international edification each week. So as we do each week, we're going to jump into our three questions and answer those based on the stories that we have seen on Monday's newsletters. We see common themes developing, and then we come up with the questions that we like to go more in depth with here on Wednesday afternoons. You get the email version of it that has the hot takes on each of the news stories. Then here on Wednesday, we'll go into some details as to what might be involved in this next few weeks and months. Now, with the new administration, a lot of international educators have been dreading this time for weeks and months since the election, and many institutions needlessly freaked out their current international students and any incoming new international students, telling them they better be on campus before Inauguration Day because you never know what might happen with this next administration, because it'll be Muslim travel bans all over again. We know that those travel bans were all torn down in court. In each of those bans, there were even exemptions carved out for students, international students. And what we're seeing this go around is a more measured approach. There's still concern over, obviously, illegal immigration, over terrorism getting into the country, and there's documented cases of known terrorists that were let into the United States and then released for some god-awful reason in the last 4 years. Those situations are being dealt with, and in a very heavy-handed way, but in administration's eyes, a very necessary way to reverse the open border that it has existed for the last 4 years. So the question we're answering today is, are we overreacting to some of Trump's executive orders? And there's a lot of understandable PTSD happening in the international ed community, and students on campus are legitimately concerned if they have, and those that have engaged in, say, protests around the Gaza conflict and perhaps expressed opinions that are supportive of Hamas and other terrorist organizations that are represent Hezbollah and others that are represented. Those acts are going to be dealt with harshly if students have been found wanting or saying things that are illegal. Even though free speech does exist in the United States, when you're a guest of the United States in legal status or not, you say things that are supportive of terrorist organizations, that in this new administration's eyes is going to put you under threat. So it's a reality that is coming, and there's references to it in the executive orders that have been released. And the one that everybody's referring to that is causing probably the most consternation, because there's a lot of unknowns to it. Basically, the one that we're sharing, I've dropped in the Pi News chat on in the chat from the Pi News this week, that talked about primarily the executive order that is asking for a review of return to extreme vetting of foreign nationals applying for U.S. visas to the maximum degree possible. And that is concerning for a number of different reasons if it's to be taken on anything more than face value. Because the extreme vetting, frankly, that is being talked about and is being referenced as what they want to have apply to citizens of other countries that are applying for U.S. visas, is about that pre-visa issuance, that vetting process. And anyone who's been in the industry for more than a minute in the United States, and certainly those that have been in the business for 20 plus years, as I have and many others have, who endured 9/11 and the after effect of that, and the extreme vetting. Extreme vetting is this current administration's term for it, but enhanced administrative processing is the technical term that all Muslim male applicants, and many from Muslim majority countries, have gone through for the last 20 plus years. That's a reality that already exists in the visa vetting process. A lot of what Trump's executive orders have been is fulfilling campaign promises that are soundbite kind of executive orders, that giving TikTok that 90-day extension to find a U.S. buyer, to saying that there are only two genders, to getting rid of DEI. Those are campaign promises that he said he would fulfill, and executive orders, because these are things that require to become official law of the land, require legislation. They don't just happen because of an executive order. A lot of what he's trying to do now. A lot of these things, like birthright citizenship, that is already being challenged by 22 states. So there are pauses placed on all of these that are getting legal challenges and won't be fully implemented. So the one that is given the 60-day window to all federal departments to examine the existing regulations on the vetting process for undesirables in terms of what disqualifies someone from being able to come into the United States. We already know students are already one of the most highly vetted visa categories out there, that highly and frankly unrealistic expectations are put on the students as they go through that visa interview process. And they already undergo the kind of enhanced security clearances that exist. I want to call out some of the universities that have been adding to the list, their perceived list. Cornell, or I think it was Cornell, yeah, Cornell, and it was kind of recreated by a number of campuses around the country. Cornell put out this passage or this statement in November that listing all the countries in the first original Muslim travel ban, the 7 countries that were in that, only 5 of which were Muslim majority, and a number of other countries like Kyrgyzstan and a couple and others were going to be added to the list, and that would be reinstated. That was something they were threatening back in November, or saying is going to happen back in November. That hasn't happened. Not saying it will not happen, but it hasn't happened. And the fears that those messages stoked are irresponsible. They even included, and this list may be extended to include China and India. No, it will not. You're absolutely out of your mind if you, as an international educator, that is intellectually dishonest to say something like that. And as an institution, an Ivy League institution, to say that is even worse. It shows ignorance, it shows fear mongering, and it shows a distinct lack of connection with the lay of the land when it comes to international education. So as far as our reaction now to what we have in place, this one particular, and we'll talk about the other one about funding, government funding to programs like Education USA and Fulbright, and the pause that's been put on, that is real and that is happening. There were worries whether it would extend to federal financial aid, and that has been excluded from this order. Individual benefits to U.S. citizens has been excluded, but anything like these that is connected to international is put on pause, as well as other government programs where funding is legitimately being questioned. Everything's being questioned by this new administration to make sure that dollars are well spent. And it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to actually make it happen. Whether that does or not, whether through the Doge Bros or any other form of review or restructuring of government departments, eliminations of government departments, all of that at the federal level. So many layers, so many different things that need to happen. Congress needs to be involved because they're the funding mechanism for the government. So lots of things need to happen. And a lot of what has been said in these executive orders is bluster, is never going to see reality in terms of legal precedents that exist that would have to be overturned in order for these things to be legal in the eyes of the government and the courts. So we overreact, yes. Or is there still danger involved? Yes. Is there jeopardy involved? Because frankly, the jeopardy involved is the damage that is done with some of the pronouncements, like we saw in 2017 when the Muslim travel ban happened. And I shared my story with you last week about that and the implications that had. But we see here that what is being proposed, they're not idiots. They've learned. We think they're idiots, but they've learned. They've learned from what the mistakes they made in the first go round in terms of the way they went about some of these things. But clearly, the executive order approach has been enhanced as short-term ways to satisfy election promises that, yes, I delivered on this, and I made this public statement in the first 24 hours I was in office, did all these things. What we're really, I think, reacting to is what we've heard in the past. We know that a lot of damage was done to our reputation as a country in the first Trump administration when it came to international students. We then had that compounded by a global pandemic that trashed new enrollments for a couple of years. That's over and done with. Those have rebounded. Is it going to dip again? If it may dip, maybe for very different reasons, but we won't know that for many months to come. The surveys will be out there, I'm sure, from IDP, from Keystone, from study portals in the coming weeks and months about reactions to this, and it will seem antithetical to what we were hearing before the election, which said students are kind of nonplussed. Some are, some aren't, but the reality is that they're kind of meh when it comes to who would be in office. So what we're looking at now is a reaction to these orders, and that is kind of formed, at least in the higher ed side and the international ed space, press space. It's formed by our experiences the first go around, expecting it to be the same. And I'm not going to lie, there are going to be things that come out of the White House, Oval Office, that I don't agree with. Many things I won't agree with. But the reality is they did learn lessons from the first time around. They are the bigger fish we need to be worrying about are not these executive orders, because they're not really going to achieve anything different in terms of these offices that were going to potentially cut countries out of being able to get visas to come to the United States. To do that as a country would be absolutely mind-boggling. You think about what happened over the weekend with regards to Colombia and accepting deported individuals that were Colombian nationals. The Colombian president said no. Trump said threatened high tariffs, and then within an hour or two, the Colombian president backed down and is now accepted into Colombia all the deported Colombians that have been rounded up in the first week. So, are many of these going to be bluffs, threats of action of closing borders or not allowing visas to be issued? I do remember clearly in the first Trump administration, one of the things in the countries that were on that list, that 7 list, was the visa processing. That reciprocal visa processing wasn't at the same level in terms of what was expected from standards of vetting of visa recipients, that of assistance with vetting of internally of candidates that were applying for visas. That was a part of those orders, that there wasn't the support within the country for students that would be coming to the United States. So those nations that were banned and put in place. That piece is the legitimate tool that you would expect foreign governments to assist us in vetting of their nationals who want to come to our country. That, I think, is a realistic expectation. But that's what was put in place the first go round, and that's the part of those bans that was upheld, that those vetting procedures are legitimate because that's national security implications in terms of making sure we have all the information we need from cooperation from students and governments in certain countries for their nationals who want to come to the U.S. That is still going to be a priority, and that's a national security priority, whether you think it is or not. I would agree with that, those reciprocal agreements on helping vetting citizens from one country coming to us would be in place, and our citizens going to them would be in place. So what I've seen with a lot of the press has been, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? A lot of hyperbolic rhetoric that's thrown around, much like the president has. That's what he does. But there's a lot in here that I think we need to be just wary of. Now, one of the things, the pie led with a story on the 23rd, U.S. visa issuance under threat for some countries. Of course, we don't know what those countries are yet, but it's the possibility, the threat of that being the case, is being used to potentially hold over. And until we get that information, we won't know what will happen with that. And all of these, whenever those restrictions come into place, guaranteed that there will be court challenges to them, and that will certainly resonate with a lot of international educators if and when that does happen. That will say these court challenges are needed, because that every step of the way, there were legal challenges to these travel bans were put in place and eventually overturned, or carve-outs for international students were put in. All of that happened. The one thing that we will mention on the funding bill, that there are legitimate concerns that for Education USA, colleagues that work on that program around the world, they're on a pause for 60 days till that gets figured out. Fulbright programs are affected, government grants, Gilman scholarships for U.S. Students to go overseas, all that's on a pause. Not that they're going to be revoked, not that they're going to be canceled or eliminated, but they're on a pause. And that's affecting all aspects of government life other than benefits direct to individuals. So there's a lot that still needs to happen, and clarity will be given as the days and weeks go ahead, and as more challenges come in, more orders and meat gets put on the bones of some of these executive orders and actual action items. Until we know that, after these 60-day, 120-day pauses or review periods, we will have a better sense of what's next. So we've got a breathing space now where we can focus on our jobs, and our jobs are always going to be to advocate for our students, to serve our students directly. Advocating through our government affairs officers, through our elected representatives, all of that needs and should continue to happen. But we are in a position now where, until we know exactly what the challenges are going to be that impact us directly, we don't know what those are yet. we need to be prepared to have ICE visitors on campus. Many of us have SEVP reps that come all the time. You might get FBI occasionally if you have students that get into trouble. All of these things happen, and we have protocols in place. But it's there's Karen Fisher's article or newsletter today had information on that, on a number of campuses that are putting in place or reviewing their guidance as to what to do. We're doing that at Akron. We're getting new policy in place to indicate to offices around campus, here's what you do if we have visitors from ICE in terms of what information we can release. It's a refresher. There's obviously FERPA stuff that's involved in all this, and when the government comes calling, what can we legitimately do? So there's always going to be things that we can be obsessing about, but the reality is our focus should always be first and foremost for our students that we're serving on campus, and being there for them, helping them to understand the implications of some of what's going on, and not to over-egg the pudding, as they say, in terms of feeding that fear. We need to present a calmness and not, certainly that we can understand where they're coming from and be sympathetic to where they are and share. We have our own fears about what, since we went through what happened the last time. Most of the students that are on our campuses now, unless they came in at the tail end of Trump, don't know what happened. They hear stories, but they don't really know. They didn't experience it themselves unless they've stayed and are doing a second degree. But we have to support our students, our current students, first and foremost. And there will come a time when we have more information about what the impact is going to be on future students and visa issuance down the road. But that's not going to happen now. We have a breathing period, 60 days at least, to figure that out. So let's take a breath collectively as an industry and be constructive and proactive in terms of what we do, in terms of advocating and making sure our government affairs officials on campus, our elected officials know through NAFSA, through the President's Alliance, through the U.S. for Success Coalition. I'm sure they're going to be getting together, ramping up soon as details become clear. And we should take our cues, frankly, from them. We know what the issues are on campus, but until we have specifics, there are wiser heads who deal with this all the time, deal with the DC culture all the time, deal with government officials all the time. They're going to know how to better respond to these individuals once we have actual concrete things that we can advocate against or for our students. So let's take a breath, because a lot of it's just bluster right now. There's not a whole lot of concrete stuff that we can really worry about. There's going to be legal challenges. Birthright citizenship is not something we need to obsess about now on campus. There will be students because that's going to get challenged in the courts. It's going to go up to the Supreme Court and a decision will be rendered. But that's on the list of things we need to be worried about. That's way down that priority list. That may have impact down the road in terms of how, if it is overturned and how wide-reaching it is, and constitutional amendments, all of these kind of things might be involved to address this issue. But we don't know that. None of that is set yet. So what we can focus on are our students on campus right now. So let's prioritize that in the coming weeks and months, as we always should and do. So let's get to our second question of the day, and that is, are undergraduate international numbers still down? This one is from another PI News article authored by Bruce Davis, and Bruce is a career innovator, leader in educational technology, CEO of Hudson Global Scholars. And that's a company dedicated to the advancement of students through high-quality online education. So anyway, he's been at Prometric, other ed tech space organizations over the years. So his article focuses on an evaluation of Open Doors report from November, also looks at Common App data from August 24 to say that, undergraduate international students are down. Numbers are down. Okay. All right, couple things. Open Doors, as we know, is not a real-time number. When that comes out in October or November each year during International Ed Week, that's a summary of the previous academic year's totals. Self-reported totals that come from institutions themselves at IIE surveys. It doesn't include everybody that enrolls international students. The numbers that we need to be looking at, if we're looking for what's the impact of elections, what's the impact of world events on our current enrollments in international education in the United States, it's not Open Doors. current enrollments. It's SEVIS by the numbers. And I've mentioned in the last few months we hadn't had an update from SEVP on the students SEVIS by the numbers since May. They did put one out in December, and like every time that the SEVP does these, they never tell anybody. It's always, well, I go back and I remember to go back and check it, or one of my colleagues, or Karen Fisher, somebody goes in and checks it and sees, oh, there's an update, and then you have to do all this number crunching on your own to figure that out, because it's not in a very user-friendly format. It doesn't allow you to sort and drill down yourself. Basically, you got to copy and paste this enormous data table, put it in Excel, and then work your magic. So what I found is from that number, where we're looking specifically at undergraduates. We all know that pre-pandemic, the number of Chinese undergraduates were by far the largest single group of individuals coming to the United States at the undergrad level, more than double their number two. I think at one point were over 180,000 undergraduate Chinese in the United States. That number has consistently dropped over the years and is well under 100,000 now. So undergraduate Chinese. And that number was accelerated by the pandemic, has not recovered. And because when you have such one group that's such a large percentage of a particular demographic, undergraduate students and international students in the U.S., when those numbers keep dropping, the overall numbers keep dropping. That's just logic and numbers and rational thinking. What we don't see is from Open Doors is you don't see the actual real-time numbers, and the real-time numbers are captured in SEVIS. The SEVIS by the numbers report that came out in May indicated that there was over 300 and oh goodness, my math skills are and my vision are a little bit challenged right now. In May of 24, there were 338,291 bachelor's degree students in the United States from overseas through SEVIS, and an overall number of 394,632. So that includes associate degree students. So just under 400,000 in May. So that's a combined associate and bachelor's degree candidates. In December, and that May number is the closest thing you can get to that Open Doors number that the author indicated. That Bruce had indicated. So that number, 342,000, was the number that he had in the open. He used from the Open Doors at the end of 23-24. That was reported in November. So that is considerably less than the 394,000 that were in the country. So more than 50,000 less were reported in Open Doors versus the SEVIS by the numbers from May, which is roughly the same time period. So there's clearly a gap between the reality of SEVIS by the numbers and what's reported by the institutions that choose to respond to the Open Doors report each year. So let's look at December, for the December report, that overall there were 346,543 bachelor's degree candidates. That's an increase of about 8,000 from May. So those numbers actually for bachelor's degree candidates was increased. So we've perhaps turned the corner on the bachelor's degree candidates in the United States. Timing of year may be a little bit to do with this. December capturing students who've been enrolled since September. So rather than maybe depending on when the May one was reported, could be after students have graduated and maybe, but still would have been in SEVIS. The December number is 393 overall, 480. So a difference of less than about 1,000 less overall with associate and bachelor's degree. So the losses were coming at the bachelor's degree level. So overall, so the numbers of undergraduates has actually, and bachelor degree students, has increased as of December over 2020, May 24. So we are moving in the right direction. It's not going to rebound completely. We know Indian undergraduate numbers have been increasing. They're actually the number 2 country for undergraduate internationals in the United States. But we are seeing seeing some other countries start to come up as we've seen growth from Vietnam and some other key markets where we may have a more robust undergraduate population from overseas coming. So don't lose hope. Undergraduate and international still are coming in increasing numbers to the U.S. for bachelor's degrees. Now, last question of the day. Has anyone checked in on our Canadian colleagues? And normally each week, for those that have been following us for a while, you've seen some of the, we like to include one of our 3 stories on a Wednesday that covers what's happening in other countries, because frankly, we often don't take enough time to understand in international ed here in the U.S. what's happening in other countries and how that can impact us positively or negatively. But our awareness of what is happening around the world is an important piece of our jobs that we don't oftentimes have enough bandwidth to really take in. So that's one of the reasons we do our newsletter. That's where we have a global roundup section there as well. And we take at least one of our, usually one of our 3 topics each week is on an international area. Canada has seen huge transformation, and not in a good way, in their international higher ed landscape over the last 2 years. IRCC, which is their equivalent of Department of Homeland Security, implemented these massive cuts, 30% cuts last year, and another 10-15% projected for this year, of study permits that would be issued. And that's had knock-on effects across the industry, from vocational colleges, English language programs, to even universities. Some of the top universities, they're never going to struggle for numbers, but others lower on the food chain, certainly on the private vocational college side, have had dramatic negative consequences to what they are doing. So what they've experienced, let's run through some of the highline stuff, and I've dropped the links to each of these articles in here. We mentioned that there was a 30% designated cut, planned reduction, not 35% actually, planned reduction for numbers for 2024 to study permits issued. They're actually on track to have a reduction of 45%. So why did that happen? That's negative, the negative impact of the reputational damage done to Canada as a country. It has a lot to do with what's happened in India and the relationship between Canada and India. India has been their #1 source of international students for many years. Many were using the study permit as a mechanism to become employees and residents of Canada. That process, that overload process, short-circuited, and is one of the reasons and reactions to a lot of the abuse by agents that were sending students, or public-private partnerships in Canada that attracted huge numbers to private colleges but getting public college degrees. That all has been impacted dramatically. The negative impacts on housing, on services, healthcare, transportation, all that's been why Canada put in place these caps. But the damage was done with Canada and India with political rows that added fuel to the fire of public sentiment against all the international students that have been coming, against Indian students in particular, that were coming for migration, not for study, primary reasons. So all of that has had a knock-on effect to now that they were predicting 30%, the government wanted 35% reduction. They got more than they wanted. They got a 45% reduction. So that's one of the challenges. You see IRCC that we mentioned is the kind of the mechanism, government body that put in place all these changes. They are now laying off 20% of their workforce because of the reduction in the volume of students that they're having to process, more than likely. You see institutions that are facing across-the-board cuts in the wake of these international student caps that are affecting their bottom line, are affecting everything that they're trying to do in maintaining what they had, and that negative impact financially is being felt across the board. You have at Centennial College, one of the more well-known public colleges in Ontario, they are cutting 49 academic programs because of the caps. So the carnage north of the border is real, and it's one that we need to be aware of and frankly sensitive to in our jobs, because if what was happening north of the border was happening here, we'd be losing our ever-loving minds. thankfully, we don't have that to deal with yet. I don't think we ever will, because to change our system of government, to change the mechanisms by which students come here, is going to require acts of Congress that will have never there hasn't been a momentum to do that for well over 40 years, and not likely that a significant chunk of the Congress is going to do that, be willing to take such drastic measures. So we will see what happens. We know there's going to be challenges in the courts, and that's where this administration's policies will be fought. And it's just up to us to make sure we're advocating for our students all along the way. That's all I'll have for you today, this week on the Roundup. Thank you for joining us. Wishing you all the very best, and we look forward to chatting with you again soon.